A man walks into the highest echelon of success, building an empire that commands attention, accumulating wealth that redefines legacy, achieving a level of competence that makes him indispensable. He possesses the authority, the freedom, and the capability to acquire virtually anything he desires. Yet he often stands alone, deliberately unattached to the single institution that society insists is the ultimate measure of fulfillment: marriage. His avoidance is not due to a failure to attract, nor is it rooted in emotional immaturity. It is a calculated, cold, and utterly strategic maneuver. This successful man is the modern ruler, and just as Niccolò Machiavelli, the master of power and strategy, observed 5 centuries ago, the effectiveness of a ruler is estimated by the structure he chooses to maintain around him. But in the modern age, the most critical structure a successful man must maintain is his psychological bandwidth, his focus, and his strategic independence. Here is where the comparison begins to take shape. The man who believes success is achieved through loud proclamation, through visible dominance, through emotional entanglement, is the fool Machiavelli warned about. Because he lacks true strategic courage? No, because he fundamentally misunderstands how real power, lasting power, works. The loudest person demanding commitment, the man broadcasting his vulnerability or his deep need for approval through dramatic displays of public devotion, is rarely the most powerful. They are often the most insecure, seeking validation or attempting to stabilize a foundation they know is internally weak. And if you try to manage your life based on public expectation and emotional necessity, Machiavelli has a devastating truth for you. True strategic power hides its claws. Real strength moves in absolute silence and prioritizes objective results above all emotional or social milestones. The moment you feel the need to prove your stability or commitment to the masses, you have already allowed external forces to dictate your strategic reality. You have lost the game of ruthless self-preservation. Look through the annals of history, examine the biographies of modern titans, and you will see a pattern. Men who have confused emotional volume with strategic authority, who mistake the act of commitment for the stability of confidence. They enter partnerships with more fanfare than necessary. They allocate more emotional and financial resources than the strategic return justifies. They allow every intimate conversation to become a test of emotional compliance, every interaction a negotiation for peace rather than a partnership for power. And they think this complex structure makes them grounded and powerful. But the strategic truth thinks otherwise. These men are advertising their critical vulnerabilities. They are broadcasting their points of leverage. They are, in essence, holding up a sign that says, "My internal stability is now contingent upon external performance and approval." And here is the brutal realization they fail to grasp. Every person watching this display, every potential rival, every opportunistic ally, every strategic opponent, is making calculations. The smart ones are noting the points of weakness. The dangerous ones are planning precisely how to exploit the new, highly visible leverage points. The valuable ones, those focused on their own absolute trajectory, are often walking away entirely, choosing to preserve their essential solitude. Before we delve into the strategic mind of Marcus Aurelius and uncover the true cost of emotional visibility that he fiercely guarded, take a moment. Tell us where you are anchoring your fortress right now. Where in the world are you tuning in to absorb this necessary, sometimes brutal truth? Here is how Machiavelli explains the strategic avoidance of unnecessary entanglement. He states that it resides in one of the most delicate layers of human nature. They do not respect loud emotional commitment. They respect quiet, strategic independence. They do not fear obvious romantic gestures. They fear unpredictable, self-contained intelligence. They do not follow the man who demands domestic partnership. They follow the man who demonstrates singular, self-sufficient leadership. This fundamental misunderstanding leads to the first catastrophic mistake many successful men make when they choose marriage. They escalate the situation by introducing a liability they cannot truly control, an X factor that writes checks their singular focus cannot cash. They start a low-grade civil war of divided attention they cannot ultimately win without crippling their primary objective. Machiavelli had a rule about all warfare, including the strategic warfare of resource allocation. Never wage a war you cannot win decisively, or avoid one you cannot afford to lose. But the man who prioritizes emotional entanglement violates this principle constantly. He gets aggressive with his time allocation, dedicating critical development hours to domestic maintenance. He turns minor personal disagreements into major psychological conflicts that bleed into his professional performance. He transforms manageable singular problems into life-destroying disasters of dual consequence. And when reality hits, when the inevitable conflicts of interest arise, it hits with the force of two lives colliding. Here is the strategic truth that destroys most men who choose vulnerability prematurely. You cannot control what happens after you escalate your personal life into a shared domain. That moment when you sign the papers, when you pledge your financial future, or when you share the sanctity of your private decision-making process, you have just lit a fuse, and you have no idea how long it is or what complicated legal and emotional mechanisms it is connected to. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, understood this perfectly. A wise man does at once what a fool does last. The fool escalates the complexity of his life first and thinks about the ultimate consequences later. The wise man considers all possible outcomes, all potential distractions, and all critical resource drains before making a single commitment. The truly successful man operates on cold strategy, not fleeting emotion. He is challenged by loneliness and immediately seeks partnership to fill the void. He feels external pressure to settle down and compromises his strategic timeline. He is presented with an emotional connection and cannot back down without feeling like he has forfeited the chance at a normal life. And here is what the strategic man realizes long before it's too late. Every major non-essential commitment is a roll of the dice where you can only lose focus. The best-case scenario is that nothing truly catastrophic happens, but your energy is perpetually diffused. The worst case is you encounter a personality, a legal system, or a circumstance that is actually more dangerous, more connected, or strategically smarter than you are. Because here is the dark truth about real predators. Whether they are market rivals or adversarial ex-partners, they don't act tough, needy, or emotional. They don't need to. They move quietly, strike precisely at the point of greatest leverage, and disappear before you know what hit you. The person who actually has power, the man focused on building something immense, does not advertise his weak points. He doesn't need to prove himself in random emotional encounters or win every domestic sparring match. He doesn't need to be the emotional alpha in every environment. And this is where choosing strategic vulnerability becomes genuinely dangerous. You invite legal and emotional retaliation from people who operate on an entirely different level of focused grievance. The quiet financial advisor you dismiss turns out to be intimately familiar with the legal implications of shared assets. The woman whose emotional stability you presumed turns out to have unexpected leverage and influential connections. The shared employee you bullied turns out to have documented evidence of your unprofessional moments. Machiavelli called this the fortune of fools, temporary emotional success through ignorance of long-term risk that inevitably leads to spectacular failure and strategic loss. The man who prioritizes commitment wins small emotional battles, but loses the strategic war he doesn't even realize he's fighting. And the worst part, everyone sees it coming except him. Because while he is focused on looking emotionally strong and stable for society, everyone else is focused on actually being strategic and calculating the cost of his sudden visibility. It is better to be feared through competence than loved through weakness if you cannot achieve both. But it is far better to be strategically underestimated than emotionally overestimated. Machiavelli states that visibility equals vulnerability. The moment everyone knows the structure of your domestic life, they start planning around its inevitable weaknesses. But the emotionally driven man does the opposite. He makes himself the most visible person in every situation, often making grand, public gestures of commitment. He ensures everyone notices his dedication, remembers his lavish expenditures, and tracks his shared movements. And here is what happens when you become the visible domestic target. You attract the attention of people who view your commitment as a problem to be solved or a resource to be divided, not through direct emotional confrontation, that is amateur hour, but through strategy, patience, and legal precision. The highly successful man who married for appearance becomes the focus of highly expensive legal investigations. His shared emails detailing financial projections get forwarded to legal counsel. His confrontational meetings at home get documented. His hostile behavior during arguments gets reported by multiple witnesses, and perhaps even recorded. Meanwhile, he thinks he is winning because he appears settled and grounded. He doesn't realize that the strategic opposition is building a legally binding case against him with every interaction, every disclosure, and every shared resource. Machiavelli calls this the blindness of the tyrant, the inability to see that apparent emotional submission often masks active strategic resistance. That obvious domestic respect often hides genuine, personal contempt. That immediate compliance with shared decisions often precedes long-term financial revenge. In the modern world, this plays out in devastating, life-altering ways. The successful man who marries too soon eventually encounters someone who prioritizes personal leverage over shared legacy. The workplace leader who commits prematurely eventually compromises his focus on a crucial venture. The social media titan who shares his entire relationship online eventually encounters someone who can dox him, sue him, or destroy his professional reputation based on personal allegations. Because here is what the strategic man never overlooks. In a world of shared property laws, social media documentation, and aggressive legal representation, every aggressive emotional act becomes evidence. Every threatening statement becomes documentation. Every intimidating behavior becomes ammunition for those who eventually seek to neutralize you. And everyone becomes your enemy when you make yourself a threat to their perceived portion of your empire. People who might have been neutral observers become hostile participants. People who might have been professional allies become opponents who fear your instability. People who might have helped you become people who actively work against your divided focus. This is what Machiavelli meant by making yourself odious. When your emotional presence becomes a problem that others need to solve, when your divided focus becomes a threat that others need to neutralize, when your attitude becomes a challenge that others need to meet. And the solution is never what the emotionally driven man expects. Here's the career-ending truth about compromising strategic independence. It destroys your credibility faster than almost anything else you can do. Because credibility is built on predictability, reliability, and singular competence. But the man who chooses premature or risky commitment is often emotional, reactive to external needs, and forced to focus on domestic dominance rather than professional results. He is more concerned with winning personal arguments than achieving objective milestones. Watch what happens in highly professional settings. The leader who tries to maintain his empire while simultaneously navigating high-stakes domestic instability loses the respect of both his superiors and his subordinates. His bosses see him as unstable and unpromotable due to his known liabilities. His employees see him as insecure and incompetent because his focus is clearly diffused. Machiavelli says that leadership is about singular influence, not divided force. The best fortress which a prince can possess is the affection and absolute confidence of the people. But the emotionally driven man operates from the opposite philosophy. Rule through divided attention and demand respect, through aggressive performance. And here is why this always backfires in organizations focused on ruthless efficiency. Fear-based or emotionally constrained leadership creates surface compliance, but underground strategic resistance. People do exactly what you tell them and nothing more. They follow orders but don't offer innovative ideas that might require your full attention. They obey but don't innovate. Meanwhile, your reputation spreads. The story of your explosive or emotionally draining private life becomes office legend. Your frustrated emails regarding domestic issues get screenshotted and shared. Your aggressive or distracted behavior becomes the example of how not to manage the pressures of success. And in professional environments, reputation is everything. It determines who wants to work with you, who trusts you with important projects, who includes you in strategic discussions. It affects your promotions, your opportunities, your entire career trajectory. But the domestically focused man doesn't realize this until it's too late. He wonders why he keeps getting passed over for crucial strategic promotions despite his strong output. He's confused about why people seem to avoid him in after-hours meetings. He doesn't understand why his groundbreaking ideas get dismissed, even when they are objectively brilliant. Because here is what Machiavelli knew about power in organizations. It flows only to those who can be trusted with absolute focus. Not those who demand it through performance, but those who demonstrate they can handle it responsibly, without external anchors weighing them down. The strategically independent man proves the opposite. Every necessary emotional concession demonstrates poor self-control over his destiny. Every interaction involving his partner proves unreliability regarding the security of proprietary information. Every act of domestic management shows he prioritizes external comfort over strategic results. And there is something even worse than losing credibility. Once you are labeled as the difficult person, the hothead, or the problem employee whose personal life is a liability, that reputation follows you like a shadow. References get checked, networks get consulted, and toxic stories get shared. Your need for external stability becomes your career ceiling. And the most painful irony, the people who eventually surpass you are often the ones you dismissed as weak or uncommitted because they chose diplomacy over dominance, strategy over aggression, and singular focus over shared liability. This brings us to the profound psychological foundation of the successful man's avoidance. Everyone sees what you appear to be, the strong, successful patriarch. Few experience what you really are, a man whose strategic independence is now compromised. Machiavelli says that the performance of strength often masks the reality of strategic weakness. And nowhere is this more tragically obvious than with men who feel compelled to participate in institutions that demand vulnerability. Because here is the psychological truth. Secure people don't need to prove their emotional stability. Confident people don't need to advertise their commitment. Strong people don't need to constantly demonstrate their shared devotion. The very act of prioritizing external commitment often reveals what you are trying to hide, that you do not feel wholly complete on your own, that you are not naturally independent, that you are compensating for the emotional or social acceptance you believe you lack. And everyone, the strategic players, can sense this. The same way you can spot a forced business smile, people can detect forced domestic confidence. The same way you can feel when someone is trying too hard, others can feel your desperation to appear normal and settled. Machiavelli called this the appearance of virtue without the strategic substance, looking the part without being the self-contained strategic powerhouse, performing the role without having the necessary independent psychological armor, projecting an image of domestic tranquility that your actual capacity for singular focus cannot support. And this becomes truly dangerous when you base your identity on a performance. You become hostage to maintaining that performance. You can't show professional vulnerability without feeling like you are breaking character in your personal life. You can't ask for emotional help without feeling like you are admitting weakness. You can't strategically back down from an argument without feeling like you are losing face in the hierarchy of your home. This creates what psychologists call the imposter trap. You are trapped playing a role that demands dual mastery, maintaining an image that exhausts your focus, living up to a reputation that limits your agility. Meanwhile, genuinely strong and strategically focused people operate differently. They don't need to prove anything to anyone. They are comfortable showing professional vulnerability when appropriate. They ask for necessary help when they need it. They back down from minor confrontations when backing down serves their larger independent goals. This is what Machiavelli meant by the lion and the fox. A prince ought to be both a fox and a lion. The lion cannot defend himself against snares of legal entanglements, and the fox cannot defend himself against the wolves of social expectation. But the emotionally driven man only knows how to be the lion of domestic strength. All force, no finesse. All aggression, no strategy. All intimidation, no quiet influence. And in a world that rewards ruthless adaptability, this inflexibility, this required shared focus becomes a fatal weakness. The man of divided attention can't adjust his approach when domestic aggression or emotional compromise doesn't work. He can't switch professional tactics when his home life is demanding immediate attention. He can't pivot strategies when shared interests prove counterproductive to his core mission. So he escalates his professional stress instead of adapting his personal needs. He gets louder at work when he should get quieter at home. He gets more aggressive with his resources when he should get more strategic with his relationships. He doubles down on what is not working in one domain to compensate for the failure in the other. And this is exactly when the real predators, the financial rivals, and strategic competitors strike, because they have been watching. They have been learning his patterns of instability. They have been identifying his forced points of weakness, and they know exactly when and how to exploit the fissure in his foundation. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see the shared burden, and few can feel the internal strategic pressure. Machiavelli understood that people make critical decisions about you based on what they observe, the visibility of your commitments, not what you intend for your career. And what they observe when you choose vulnerability isn't true strength, it's instability. Here is what happens to successful men who consistently choose external commitment over internal solitude. They gradually become isolated, not just socially, but professionally, emotionally, and most critically, strategically. Because here is what most people don't tell the domestically entrenched man. He is exhausting to be around. Every conversation becomes a potential minefield of shared problems. Every interaction requires emotional armor because his psychological resources are low. Every professional relationship feels like a negotiation with a hostile party, his own divided self. Strong people, the genuinely strategic people, avoid this energy. They don't have time for emotional management outside of their core objectives. They don't want to walk on eggshells around someone whose focus is split. They don't need the drama that comes with allying with someone who views every interaction as a test of balancing dual responsibilities. So who sticks around the domestically entangled man? Users, manipulators, the weak, the ones who benefit from his scattered attention, the ones who can redirect his remaining energy toward their own enemies, or people who are weak but feel stronger by association with someone who appears strong but is actually vulnerable. But none of these people are actually loyal. They are there for what they can get, not who you are. They will abandon you the moment your divided focus becomes a liability. They will distance themselves when your reputation for instability becomes toxic. Machiavelli warned about this devastating result. Men who can be truly useful to a prince are rare. Those who merely appear useful are common. The man who chooses premature or unnecessary commitment attracts people who appear useful, but disappear when real loyalty is needed, when strategic support is required, when absolute trust would make a profound difference. And the isolation gets worse over time because maintaining a complex shared life requires constant vigilance. You can't relax. You can't be professionally vulnerable. You can't show doubt, fear, or uncertainty about your professional path without feeling like you are breaking character in your private life. This creates what psychologists call emotional and professional isolation. Even when you are surrounded by people, you are fundamentally alone because nobody knows the real, strategic you. They only know the performance of shared stability. And this isolation has direct practical consequences. You don't get invited to the most important, discreet conversations because people worry about your required reaction time. You don't get included in high-stakes strategic planning because people can't predict your necessary response to domestic emergencies. You don't get offered opportunities because people question your ultimate commitment and judgment. Meanwhile, the people you dismissed as self-centered or lonely are building formidable networks. They are creating singular alliances. They are developing deep, unbreakable trust with people who actually matter in the game of power. Because here is what Machiavelli knew about real power. It's not about what you can demand from people. It's about what people will willingly do for you. It's not about who fears your temper. It's about who trusts your unwavering focus. It's not about who you can intimidate into compliance. It's about who you can strategically influence. And influence requires focused effort, which requires absolute psychological bandwidth, which requires strategic independence, which requires dropping the societal obligation and allowing people to see who you actually are, a strategic entity committed to singular objectives. But for many successful men, this feels impossible. They have been performing the strength of shared life for so long, they have forgotten what genuine, self-contained strength feels like. Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. This is Machiavelli's most famous quote, and it is also his most strategically misunderstood, especially regarding commitment. People think it means you should be scary, aggressive, and intimidating in personal life, but that is exactly wrong. Machiavelli was not talking about fear through domestic aggression. He was talking about fear through undeniable competence, not fear of your temper, but fear of your capabilities when fully focused, not fear of your anger, but fear of the severe consequences of opposing your strategic objective. There is a massive structural difference. When people fear your aggression or instability, they either avoid you or plot against you. When people fear your singular competence, they respect you and want to work with you because they know you are an unstoppable, self-sufficient force. Think about the people you genuinely respect. It is not the man who loudly announces his domestic fulfillment. It is the person who speaks quietly, but everyone listens because their results are monumentally self-evident. This is what Machiavelli called the appearance of necessity. When your singular value is so obvious that opposing you seems foolish. When your competence is so established that challenging your trajectory seems counterproductive. When your track record is so strong that betting against your independent success seems unwise. But this kind of power takes time, clarity, and uncompromised focus to build. It requires consistent performance rather than consistent performance of commitment. It demands actual results rather than theatrical displays of domestic stability. It needs genuine self-confidence rather than manufactured reliance on another person. And here's the beautiful, brutal irony. The people who focus only on being strategically valuable become powerful. The people who focus on appearing emotionally settled become vulnerable. Because real power is about options. When people need what you can singularly provide, you have leverage. When people respect what you can accomplish without dependence, you have influence. When people trust your judgment based on your results, you have authority. None of this requires external entanglement. In fact, external entanglement actively prevents it, because men who commit prematurely focus on short-term emotional dominance instead of long-term strategic value. They prioritize immediate domestic respect over lasting professional influence. They choose emotional comfort over unwavering focus. Machiavelli understood that sustainable power comes from being strategically indispensable, not irreplaceable through emotional intimidation, but irreplaceable through absolute contribution. Not feared because you are dangerous to live with, but feared because losing your singular focus would be professionally costly to the world. And this kind of power is actually more secure, because it is based on what you can do independently, not what you can threaten to do collaboratively. It is grounded in your absolute capabilities, not your willingness to escalate domestic drama. It is built on your singular value, not your volatility, which means you can drop the need for public approval without losing power. In fact, dropping the need for external validation often increases your power because now people can actually trust your undivided focus. They can rely solely on your judgment. They can build a strategy around your predictable self-reliance. And this leads to the ultimate Machiavellian insight. The wise man does at once what the fool does last. The fool seeks marriage until he is forced to be strategic about his resources. The wise man is strategic from the beginning, which makes unnecessary commitment unfeasible. We have just laid the foundation of ruthless strategy and the necessity of independent focus. This is the bedrock of strategic avoidance. Share your immediate takeaway that resonates deepest with your current commitment level. Write this phrase in the comments right now. I choose competence over chaos. You need this level of brutal strategic insight every single week to protect your empire. Ensure you lock in your place in this community right now by subscribing and acknowledging this necessary lesson with a definitive like. The cost of time and resources is immense, but the true threat to the successful man lies in misaligned long-term interests. Next, we will dismantle the final, most dangerous illusion, the myth of shared legacy. We will reveal the ultimate strategic truth that Marcus Aurelius kept fiercely close, the hidden reason why the most powerful men never sign the contract, and why the most successful people understand that the greatest battle they face will never be fought in the marketplace but in the division of their own strategic assets. Do not miss the final, decisive calculation. We expose the tough guy as the most vulnerable man in the room. His posturing, his noise, his aggression, all were merely advertisements for his internal fear and strategic immaturity. He chases short-term dominance and ensures long-term destruction. But now we must pivot from the tactical mistakes of the insecure man to the existential calculus of the successful man, the man operating on the level of Marcus Aurelius. This man isn't worried about winning a bar fight. He is concerned with winning his life, with maximizing his singular focus. He understands that genuine strength is demonstrated not by what he conquers externally, but by what he chooses to abstain from internally. We are shifting the arena from the battlefield of the workplace to the inner sanctum of the personal life, where the stakes are infinitely higher. The successful man, the architect of his own empire, recognizes that every commitment is a cost, every emotional tie a point of potential leverage, and every shared resource a strategic risk. When viewing marriage through the lens of Marcus Aurelius's disciplined Stoicism and Machiavelli's brutal realism, the institution transforms from a cultural requirement into a strategic liability. The question is not one of romance, but of sovereignty. Does the commitment enhance your mission, or does it diminish your control? This analysis requires absolute mental clarity, a separation of cultural programming from cold, hard strategy. I need to know you are fully engaged, ready to confront this definitive truth about success and sacrifice? Tell me right now, in the comments below, the city you are mastering this strategy from. Let the geographic location confirm the unwavering focus we need for this final defining segment. The successful man operates on the principle of maximum focus and minimal distraction. For Marcus Aurelius, the highest calling was the cultivation of the inner citadel, the self-governance of the mind, the absolute control over one's reactions and emotions. Marriage, almost by definition, is the willing introduction of the single largest variable of emotional chaos and strategic noise into that citadel. It is the voluntary surrender of a massive amount of psychic energy that could otherwise be allocated to mission execution, wealth generation, or philosophical pursuit. The successful man views his mental bandwidth as his most precious finite resource. Every minute spent managing relational conflict, navigating interpersonal politics, or absorbing the emotional burdens of another is a minute stolen from the core mission. This is not selfishness. This is existential resource management. Consider the immense cost of emotional leverage. The tough guy advertised his weakness through his aggression. The married man exposes his vulnerability through shared intimacy. This shared life grants another party unparalleled access to the deepest vulnerabilities, the strategic timelines, and the complete inventory of psychological weak points. In the event of a dissolution, which the successful man must always factor in as a potential outcome, because strategy demands modeling worst-case scenarios, that intimacy transforms into the most potent strategic weapon. The successful man avoids marriage because he avoids creating an internal enemy with unlimited access and legal sanction to dismantle his life's work. His mission requires him to be impervious, and marriage creates a necessary, yet crippling vulnerability. Aurelius taught that external things cannot harm the soul, but they can certainly dismantle the architecture of a man's life. The successful man refuses to give anyone the key to the wrecking ball. Furthermore, there is the fundamental conflict in the allocation of time and priority. The successful man's career, his legacy, his climb to the highest echelons, demands an intensity of dedication that is fundamentally incompatible with the conventional demands of a successful marriage. The commitment required to build something truly exceptional, whether it is a global company, a scientific breakthrough, or a political movement, demands 80 to 100 hours per week, deep work solitude, and the ability to pivot resources instantly without consultation. The marital contract inherently restricts this flexibility. It imposes a non-negotiable tax on time, presence, and emotional availability, often demanding that the relationship supersede the mission. For the man whose mission is his lifeblood, this is an unacceptable compromise. This is the Marcus Aurelius strategic truth. Your primary allegiance must be to your highest self and your highest purpose. Anything that regularly pulls you away from that purpose or dilutes the intensity of your focus must be viewed with suspicion. Marriage, for the man who operates at a high strategic velocity, often becomes the anchor that prevents him from achieving escape velocity. The world rewards focus, not balanced commitment. When the truly successful man looks at the strategic cost-benefit analysis of marriage, he sees the exchange of total personal sovereignty for a domesticated life, and the calculation often lands firmly on avoidance. Let us confront the legal and financial reality, the cold, hard contract that underpins the cultural performance. The successful man has spent his life building fortresses of wealth, assets, and influence. Marriage is a legal framework that instantly transfers shared ownership and access to those fortresses, regardless of the relative contribution to their creation. In modern jurisprudence, especially for the high net worth individual, divorce is not a separation. It is a hostile, state-sanctioned financial extraction. Machiavelli warned that a prince must guard against making himself hated and despised, but he must equally guard against being robbed of his resources. For the successful man, the risk of losing half his strategic capital, coupled with potential alimony and asset division, is an untenable exposure. The financial setback is often crippling, but the true devastation lies in the strategic diversion. Years spent in legal warfare, millions spent on adversarial lawyers, and the emotional energy that must be poured into defending assets instead of generating new ones. The strategy of avoidance is simply the minimization of catastrophic risk. Why willingly sign a document that grants another person the legal right to execute a scorched earth policy on your financial future? The successful man understands that the modern system is not designed to support partnership. It is designed to manage asset dissolution. The risk is asymmetrical. The man has exponentially more to lose than he stands to gain. The strategic choice is clear. Structure your life to insulate your mission and your assets from unpredictable volatility. The highest form of financial intelligence is risk management. And for the high-value man, marriage represents the single greatest unmanaged risk. This strategic choice also preserves the man's essential solitude, a necessity for genuine achievement. The kind of profound introspection required to make world-altering decisions, the level of strategic silence required to perceive true geopolitical, market, or societal trends, demand sustained periods of uninterrupted internal focus. Aurelius retreated to his journal. The modern strategist retreats to his focus room, his plane, his uncompromising solitude. Marriage fundamentally erodes this space. It introduces constant negotiation, mandatory social commitments, and the need for perpetual emotional reporting. The successful man needs his own counsel. He needs to be the singular sovereign of his decisions. When a man merges his destiny, every major choice, location, career move, investment strategy, lifestyle adjustment, must be processed through a joint filter. This dual governance slows the decision cycle, introduces compromise where none should exist, and fundamentally dilutes the clarity of command. The successful man operates on the principle that the highest decisions are best made by a single, focused commander, not a committee of two. The successful man, therefore, avoids marriage not because he fears commitment, but because he respects the magnitude of his mission. He has calculated the cost of distraction, measured the weight of emotional leverage, and analyzed the certainty of legal vulnerability. He understands that the pursuit of excellence demands singular devotion, and that institutionalized partnership introduces friction and fragility into the very foundation of his life's strategic architecture. This avoidance is not a condemnation of all relationships, but a strategic declaration that the existing legal and emotional frameworks of marriage are often actively hostile to the scale of ambition he holds. He seeks alliance, collaboration, and mutual respect. But he will not sacrifice his ultimate sovereignty or expose his life's work to unlimited liability simply to satisfy a cultural script. The choice to remain strategically unattached is the ultimate demonstration of self-governance and commitment to an impersonal, higher purpose, the highest expression of Marcus Aurelius's strategic truth applied to the personal domain. The man who operates at this level chooses partnership only when it is a clear net strategic gain, a true multiplier of his efforts, not merely a comfortable addition to his domestic life. And because such partnerships are exceptionally rare, the default strategic position is isolation, discipline, and uncompromising focus. We have now unveiled the full strategic truth that the successful man does not avoid marriage out of weakness or fear of intimacy, but out of strategic necessity, risk aversion, and the disciplined commitment to his mission. He does not confuse cultural expectation with strategic intelligence. His strength lies in his refusal to engage in non-essential conflicts or create voluntary vulnerabilities. Now I want you to make a definitive statement. In the comments right now, declare your non-negotiable focus. Summarize your ultimate strategic priority in a single powerful phrase, something you will commit to defending above all else. Write, "My citadel is," insert your focus. This commitment is the first step toward true sovereignty. If this exhaustive breakdown of strategic masculinity has fundamentally altered your view of personal power and self-governance, you know the value you just received. Do not let this insight become just another passing thought. Solidify your strategic progress. Hit that like button now to affirm your commitment to this ruthless level of analysis, and then subscribe immediately. You must join this community of strategists who understand that the world is a game of chess, and we are here to master the board. And understand this: we have explored the strategic traps of the personal life and the fallacy of fake strength. Next time, we dive into the very fabric of legacy. We will dissect the 3 most critical miscalculations men make when trying to ensure their life's work survives them, revealing the unseen forces that can erase decades of power and achievement overnight. Prepare yourself. You need this strategic insight before you commit one more day to building something fragile. The pursuit of sustainable power is non-stop, and you cannot afford to miss the next move.